Hi, and welcome to my latest video, which is almost a step back in time because here we're going to cover beginners or intermediate guide to family history genealogy. We'll talk about some of the basic building blocks that will set us all off to be a better family historian. And I'm about to give this presentation at a local library, so if you attended the presentation at a library, thanks for attending. And for everybody on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel and like this video. It really will help me build up a portfolio of videos that are interested in genealogists. So we're going to cover this in 5 areas. We'll talk about focus areas. This is a thing that many genealogists don't talk about how we're going to basically approach your genealogy. We'll talk about how to structure, how to think about your research, because it's important you think about this in a logical way. We'll briefly touch about the role of DNA, which is a huge subject on its own. Tools and software everywhere these days for genealogy. So again, we'll touch on that and then I'll give you some final thoughts. This presentation, you'll see some images. All the images were created with AI and particularly ChatGPT. And there's a number of videos on my channel about how best to use AI as a genealogist. But anyway, let's get started and let's talk about focus areas. Now there's 3 focus areas and really one builds on the other. And one that most people are most familiar with is the hierarchical lineage, looking at a chart here of my family tree. And this is the basic vital records, what we call birth, marriage, and death. And this is basically what most people see when they think of a family tree. But a lot of people just leave it at that. They're just really interested in the number of people in the tree and how they can build their tree out. So you'll see on Ancestry that some people have got 100,000 people in their tree. Now, most trees contain errors, so don't copy anybody else's tree, but they may be controversial to say, but the bigger the tree, in my opinion, the more errors are in it. It sometimes can take me weeks or even more just to add 1 or 2 people to my family tree, so adding hundreds of thousands is a major feat. But anyway, when we look at ancestry and family trees, this is a lineage, this underpins our research. What I find more interesting, though, is actually adding some context to it, the actual family history part of it. Where your ancestors lived. Let's create some maps. Let's see how they related to people in an area. Did everybody live in the same street? Where did they work? What kind of hobbies did they have? So forensic genealogy, dating photographs. We'll talk about taking stock later on about what you have within your own family. This is where this comes into play. All the things that add context to your family history is very, very interesting. And I think maps and old photographs really add context to your family tree. So we talk about lineage, we add our family history to that. And then another important is the social history. Where did they live? What was going on? What was the town like? What was happening at the time? What kind of jobs they have? You can spend some time researching their jobs. My family were either sheep farmers in the north of England or relatively recently in Victorian times worked in sugar mills, which is a horrendous place to work. But I did a lot of research about those particular jobs, and it again added to the family trees. So there's lots of history books. There's actually specialty websites for most jobs, most cities now. And you all can add in friends, associates, neighbors. If you had a family member that was a neighbor of a famous person or worked for the president or prime minister, add that in as part of the social context. So adding social history, family history to your lineage really builds out a tree. So take some time. This is not just about dates and people. It's about family and social history as well. So once you've given that some thought, we can talk about the research strategy. And this really pins into how we're going to look at our family tree, how we're going to research our family tree. So these are 6 steps, and really you can see how it pans out from you. So first of all, we'll lay the foundation of our family history. We'll look at our immediate family, then we'll look at our close relatives, and then we'll do what I think is detailed research. We'll look at our near ancestors, our far ancestors, and our distant ancestors. So we're moving back in time as part of our research. So how do we lay a foundation? So there's two parts of laying a foundation. The first part is to take stock of what family history objects you have, and everybody has these. And as we move or people grow up or things like that, these are lost to time. So things like letters, documents, Bibles, photographs, old telephones, books. Make sure you document what you have, because these over time are lost. Generationally, things get turned over. We all move. We throw out boxes. So take stock of what you have, what your immediate family has. You don't have to take ownership of it. Just take pictures, write the story, document it. Is it a famous piece of furniture? Whatever. These will be very important to your ancestors as you build a tree up. And the second part of laying the foundation is talking to your relatives. And unfortunately, a lot of us start family history a little bit later in life, and some of our relatives are already passed on. But now we need to take the opportunity to interview our relatives and get their memories down on paper. Now, be very respectful. Sometimes you can take notes, sometimes you can record. There may be things that they don't want to discuss. And also remember that memories are not records, but you can transcribe these. In fact, you can create audio or video files and attach them to your tree, typically these days. So those are the foundations. What objects you have, and make sure we integrate the people's stories, because stories, again, are lost as people pass with us. Now we have time now to start thinking about building the tree. And you are the first twig in your tree. In your family tree, the twig we're going to start out is you. And then we'll move from you to the branches, and this will very quickly grow. You'll be surprised how quickly it grows into a tree. So we start with you and your immediate family, your parents and your grandparents, your uncles, aunts, and cousins. And you can document, where did they go to school? What occupations they have? Where were they born? Some major facts. What a lot of people tend to do is leap to great grandparents and forget about the people around them. So make sure, obviously, privacy is an important thing here, but make sure that you detail all your immediate family and give them as much information as is prudent to do. And you can either document this as online in one of the cloud tools like Ancestry, or you can just document this on your personal computer or even on a notebook. But make sure you capture this, where people worked, what their thoughts were. You can get books, in fact, where there'll just be a blank page and a question across the top, and you can hand this to people and they can fill in the details. But again, a step that a lot of people miss. They don't talk about their immediate family, they move into their ancestors right away. But let's get this done first, and then we'll branch out from there. So we'll talk about your grandparents, the grandparents' brothers and sisters, their nieces and nephews. And now, as we can see, we don't have to branch back very far to see we have a lot of people now in our family. And this is where, as we'll talk later on, you may need some tools to organize it. But now we're talking about a logical way of going about this. We're talking about our close relatives, our extended family, and now we can move on. So now we have the base, and we can start looking back beyond the base. And the first step, and I've chopped this into three areas: up to 200 years ago, 200 to 400 years ago, and 400 and distant relatives, right? So the last 200 years, there's a lot more documentation around, and I call this the census era. For many countries, not all, but for many countries, they've been doing censuses around 200 years. The first British census, or English census, I would say, was in 1841, so that's almost 200 years ago. And we can use these censuses that appear every 10 years as the backbone to our research, because that will give us the location, immigration, citizenship, all those kind of things on a census. They'll give us siblings, spouses, children, and even grandchildren. So we can build on top of that. We can lay on the vital records, which are birth, marriage, and death. I won't go into this diagram in too much detail, but if you can touch on all those things: residence, newspapers, vital records, land records, baptisms of children, any military records, gravestones, obituaries, probate, trades, occupations, and maybe to come across the courts, you'll have a wealth of information about any particular person in your tree. As you can imagine, as I mentioned earlier on, this takes a lot of time. This takes days, if not weeks, and to validate this. So, but again, most of this now is becoming more available. I would say already available. A lot of it's online, and it's a great place to start. So we can go back 200 years into our history. Now, between 200 and 400 years ago, some of those documents like census are no longer around. We'll have to start moving to different kinds of records. Church records go back well beyond 400 years, and they include baptism, marriages, and church burials. Now, remember with church records, there's a mistake that a lot of people make. Baptisms don't indicate birth. So people can be baptized. I've got a relative who was baptized in their 40s. So you can't assume a baptism record is a birth record, but it will. Some of them will give you information, even the mother's maiden name and occupations. People who had land, especially, or any kind of wealth, did leave a will. And even for those people that didn't have any land, they may get mentioned in wills. So probate records and wills do give a lot of information. We can use DNA to start testing here. From 0 to 200 years, we were looking at matches. Now we can look at different kinds of relationships on DNA. Now, DNA doesn't prove a relationship as such. You can't tell that this is a third cousin, but you can tell that you're related. Also, court records. Courts were very active 200 to 400 years ago, and we can see people who are in trouble for all kinds of things. So, and not just court in terms of crime, but apprenticeships, any kind of legal documents. Again, some of this is very well documented, and we can start building information around that. For the US, especially immigration, the court records for immigration will be there, and we can also look at the immigration patterns. There will be patterns to people's immigration, and you may be lucky enough to find the ship or any of the immigration information beyond 200 years ago. And then finally, especially for the US, people that are arriving in this period often own land or homestead, and those again are very well recorded at the county and federal statutes. Now, where do you find these records? For each particular record, for each particular place, it will be slightly different. And obviously, Google is your friend, or AI now, and I could basically go on and say, where can I find the court records for Pennsylvania? And it will get me off to a good start. Now, going back even further in time to our distant ancestors, it gets a little bit more difficult. Church records are still there. They're harder to read, some might even be in Latin. There's early legal documents, again, court proceedings. Genealogy will still give relationships. Again, they won't tell you how you're related, but it'll give you a relationship. Local, regional, university, and county archives, you may tell stories about your relatives that way. They may have been church wardens, they may have owned a local mill, that kind of stuff. Now, there will be published genealogies. As I said earlier, don't copy somebody's genealogy, but it's often a good start. You can use their citations to go and do your own research. And one of the most powerful areas to use as a resource is the societies and studies. So, for instance, most regions now have a genealogical society. You can have them in the US or France or Scotland or even to a specific city or region. So they were enormously helpful in terms of helping you with research. And there's one-name studies or studies around particular types of landowners or occupations. So and social sites like Facebook as well will help you. So as we saw, we can look at our different ancestors 200 up to 200 years ago, where we can do a lot of research. 200 to 400, it gets a little bit more difficult. And over 400 years ago, it gets a little more difficult still. And you may only find one record, which will be difficult to validate. And as we talk about in different courses, naming records get very difficult. People start using the same name over and over and over again. So my mother's maiden name is Bousfield, and Stephen Bousfield, there's literally dozens of them around. So, you can't always validate that the record you're looking at is actually a relationship. So that's the structure, right? So we'll kind of go back there a little bit. We'll go back and talk about where we were. Let's go back to different steps, lay the foundation. So we talk about laying the foundation of your different objects and talking to people. We'll look at your immediate family, people that you know. Your close relatives will be people that you relate to that you may not know that well. And then we go near ancestors, 0 to 200 years, far ancestors, 200 to 400 years, and distant ancestors over 400 years ago. And that's how we can work out a very structured approach. And if you do it in this way, you will have a tree that stands the test of time. So we'll go back on there. So we'll move back out through this, and we'll go to one thing that is very, very powerful in your research. Well, let's go all the way back to DNA. The role of DNA within genealogy can be huge. Many people make use of DNA to fundamentally put together their own family tree. Some people don't use it at all. DNA is a huge subject, and we're just going to touch on the briefest part of it here. Now, what we're going to talk about here is DNA matching. And if you remember before, I was talking about 0 to 200 years. This is where DNA matching works the best, within 0 to 200 years, those kind of generations. We can also do lineage tracking, where Y chromosomes and mitochondrial DNA goes down straight line. It doesn't tell you where you belong on the line or on the branch, if you like, but it does give you that there is a relationship there. And then we'll talk a little bit about ethnicity estimates that are, a fun thing, not totally scientific, but a fun thing. Now, but before we start with DNA, one of the things you must understand, you must think about the ethical issues and the emotional issues of using DNA. It can bring to light misappropriated births, give you relationships you wasn't expecting, and for some DNA testing companies, it can give you medical history. Just be very careful, give it a lot of thought before you go into DNA. But let's talk about DNA matching here. And this is fundamentally where, as most people know, we inherit our DNA from our parents, and we inherit approximately 50% from each parent, or 25% from each grandparent, and we pass on about 50% to our children. So we can look at the broad percentages and identify relatives here, not relationships with relatives. If we look at this chart, you can see that at 25%, so 25% of my DNA, it could be my grandchild, it could be a niece, nephew, it could be a grandparent, or it could be an uncle, aunt. So DNA itself does not identify the relationship. If we see somebody with 25%, we know that they're more or less going to be a grandparent, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, grandchild. It's up to us then, using our own research, to fundamentally tie down what the relationship is. And within DNA matching, the companies that do DNA matching match your DNA to people that have submitted their own DNA, and they'll give you a percentage match. Now, these are approximates, and most companies now will give you what they think it should be, whether it's first cousin, second cousin, and they'll give you a bunch of alternatives. Then it's up to you to tie in with your own research where you belong. Now, if you have a sibling and you don't share any DNA, then that bodes for further investigation, or you just have 25% of the DNA. So not only does matching bring together your tree, people that you should match but don't match also give fundamental indications that something that you expect to see is not there. Now, look, there's lots of information on DNA on the internet. It can get very, very confusing, but for the sake of a beginner, it's useful to know just how these matchings work. Now, we'll leave aside the lineage DNA, the Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA. That's probably a subject for another presentation. Just know if you're testing either one of those, it will tell you where you are on the lineage, but tell you you're on the lineage, but not whereabouts on the lineage you live. Now, the other thing is we see DNA ethnicity. So what we've done here is the DNA companies have taken reference DNAs from people indigenous people that belong in certain areas, and the families have stayed in those areas for a long time. And then they match your DNA to the indigenous people. And this particular one we're looking at here is a very colorful one. Mine is 95% English and Irish, uh, but this DNA is from somebody who's from Cuba. And you can see uh, it's Spain, primarily Spain, but there's a whole bunch of different things. So it's matched a bunch of indigenous um, different countries, if you like. Now, this is interesting. It doesn't really help you per se in your family history. It's just an interesting thing to have. They're broadly right. They change the reference populations from time to time. And if you look at 2 or 3 different companies, you'll get 2 or 3 different results. So it's interesting. Anything below 5%, I would kind of discount probably, and maybe the next time they do the matching, it might disappear. But for here, you can see with relative confidence that the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain, Portugal, is a key ancestral home of the person who took this DNA. So we talked about how to measure your family, how to research your family. We've talked about DNA. Let's talk about tools and software, because there is an awful lot of tools and software out there. When I first started doing genealogy, there was very little in the way of online research, but now there's almost too much stuff available. So the type of tool that would be available to you are family tree builders. Now they come in lots of different ways. Ancestry, Find My Past, Family Search, a cloud-based where you build your tree. There's others such as Roots Magic that you can put on your laptop and do it individually. I would say again that all these family tree builders that give you hints from other family trees, be very, very careful. The genealogy research databases, and they're all over the place. So you could go to Ancestry, that's got billions and billions of records, all the way to specific databases for India or Spain or any different company. So part of doing your research is to research the best tools available for you and which database is the best for you. So a lot of my research is in the UK, so there's a whole bunch of UKI, there's Find My Past, there's Ancestry. So there's a whole bunch of different websites that allow me to research my family in the UK. But again, even with billions and billions and billions of records, they're not, they maybe have 10%, 15%. So most of the records are still not online. We talked about DNA testing services earlier, but what my recommendation would be is to try and tie your DNA testing service provider in with your family tree builder. So that way you can get the automatic matches between your tree and other people's trees. There's collaboration platforms. So we can use Facebook, and there's lots of them, lots of different sites within Facebook and Instagram where you can collaborate. There's Roots Web, lots of things where you can go on there and collaborate with different researchers, one name studies and that kind of stuff. Now, within all this, there's specialist research sites. So if I wanted to research Pennsylvania, I can go to the Pennsylvania Genealogical Society. If I wanted to research coal mining, for instance, there'll be a society for that. There's almost specialty sites for almost everything: immigration, nationality, employment, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, genealogical societies. So most regions and areas already have genealogical societies, and these societies are really, really helpful. They'll be aware of what kind of records are available for their particular region, what's online, what's not online, and often you can hire a genealogist through those sites if you wish. So for instance, if I wanted to do research in New York, I'd go to the New York Genealogical Society and join the society and have access to their records through the site there. Now, one key thing that's changed fundamentally over the last almost year is artificial intelligence. And by the way, you can do a lot of things with artificial intelligence, and this is an image of me as a Roman chieftain created with AI, and it's kind of a good-looking guy compared to what you see in front of you. But anyway, AI is a great tool. I've put a lot of videos together about how best to use it. So it will help you. Just think of AI as your top research assistant. It will help you analyze data. It will help you interpret data. It will help you, if you was researching New York, it will give you information of where you can go to look for New York records. It will analyze images. So if I want to date a subject on a photograph, it will start me off on that. Now, again, remember, artificial intelligence is not perfect. It gets it right between 80 and 90% of the time. You need to make the final decision. So if you ask AI to date a photograph, then the dating could be wrong. You've got to go and look at its rationale. So as I said in one of my other videos, you always ask AI to give you its reasoning. So if you're trying to date a photograph, ask it to date the photograph and ask it why it's made that decision. It's pretty good in transcription and translation. So if I have a document I want to transcribe, or a document that I want to translate, or even do both, it's pretty good. And I use ChatGPT all the time. A lot of people use it for writing and editing, but again, be very, very careful about this. The way AI writes is not the way you probably would write. So it's okay to help you create a draft, look for grammar mistakes, look for spelling mistakes, but don't let AI write anything for you. It's kind of missing the point here. You're not learning, you're not doing your own research. You may as well ask somebody else to write things for you. So writing and editing is great. A lot of people use it for that. But frankly, because I use AI a lot, I can look at anybody's writing and almost tell immediately what's being produced by AI. If you've done research, and one thing I've used on this is if you do research like a proof validation, if you don't have any analysis on exactly where a relative fits in and you've come to some hypothesis, you can get AI to test your hypothesis, and it's very good at this. It will point out where you've made logic flaws and this, that, the other, and I use that for all the time. And you can use it to compare two papers against each other. So let's say, for instance, somebody's written a paper about one of my relatives and I've written the same paper. You can get AI to compare and contrast to see what would be the same and what would be different. So in a whole, AI is a research assistant. You can use it in a myriad of ways. It's an indispensable tool, but again, don't let it take over your research. It's not always right. It's like other people's trees. It needs you to validate what it's doing. And if you use it as rather augmented intelligence or augmented work for you, then it will make your work better. If you try and get it to do the work for you, invariably your work will be worse for it. Now, I know the software can get very expensive. And for instance, Ancestry now is hundreds of dollars a year. So one thing I recommend everybody do here in the US and certainly in other countries too, is join your local library, because almost every library has a genealogical access to it, where you can go and use different editions within Family Search, within MyHeritage, Ancestry Library. So these are the ones that are available here in Hillsborough County, Florida, where I live. And the computer's there, you can go in and use it. A fantastic site. It will save you hundreds of dollars a year. You can go in, and if you find these tools are really, really useful, then you can make the decision to buy. But it is really, really worth going to your library and using that as a tool. And then some final thoughts, just to kind of cover what we talked about so far. We've covered a lot of ground in a very short period of time. So here are my final thoughts. There's 5 final thoughts. Always keep a backup copy of your tree. Whether you're using Ancestry or whether you've got your own software or however you've done it, there could be losses. We've heard about services getting hacked into, so keep a backup copy of your tree. Always cite your sources. Believe me, whether it's a relative that's told you something, or you've seen it in a newspaper, or you've got the document, always record accurately where that information came from. In 3 or 4 years' time, you'll have forgotten. And then you're looking at somebody's burial information, or for instance, and you can't remember how you came about that, and once you can't remember, it's a useless source of information. So cite your sources. Now there's very, I guess, academic ways of doing that, but do it in such a way, if you don't want to use the very academic ways of citing a source, do it in a way that you can always go back to. So if you imagine yourself or somebody else picking that information up, make it sure that you can use it. If it's not academically correct, it doesn't matter as long as it's useful. Never copy anybody else's research. And I've said about this a couple of times. While it's tempting to take shortcuts and copy people's work into your tree, almost invariably you're going to copy in things that are not correct. So you're okay to look at other people's research, see how they've come, see what sources they've used. But I can tell you, if I go into Ancestry and look at other people's trees, 90% of it is not sourced accurately. So if it's not sourced accurately, in my view, it's just could be a fact that somebody's made up. A single source is not proof. So always try, and as we go back, it's going to get more difficult, but always try and have multiple sources. So if you have a gravestone with a birth date on there, that isn't necessarily a great source on its own. You know, it could be 80 years on. People may have not known when to carve the gravestone. So you always need multiple sources to be completely certain of the fact that you're looking at. Now, as we go back 400 years, getting multiple sources gets more and more difficult. But if you've only got one source, then you've got to make a citation that really explains why you think this source is correct on its own. And then finally, remember our ancestors were not always truthful. They weren't truthful on birth certificates or death certificates, marriage certificates, census records. So for whatever their reasons, they could have made up their names, they could have changed their ages, they could have changed their nationality. So it's not always a mistake when you see something, or it might not always be true. People, certainly when we go back a few hundred years ago, and there was no way of validating. So for instance, if somebody went into report a death or a marriage or a birth, often it was taken at face value. So, you know, there was not the kind of computer systems around as they are today to follow up. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. It's only taken, I guess, a few minutes, and I've covered a lot of ground. If you need to contact me, here is some information. Here's my email address. I've got a website I'm continually building. And if you're on YouTube, you know I've got a bunch of videos. And if you are on YouTube, please take the time to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And have a great day and good luck with your research. Please let me know if I can help you in any way.